The mountains of northern Portugal are breathtaking in springtime, green and alive with the scent of wild rosemary. But in late October, they tell a different story. The leaves fade to brittle shades of copper and brown, the air thins, and each day feels shorter than the one before. By the time the sun sets behind the serrated ridge lines, the cold falls like a sheet of ice over the valleys. In the village of Vale da Esperança, life had always moved with the seasons. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names, where the church bell marked not just the hours but the rhythm of life itself. Farmers brought in their last harvest before the frosts, mothers stacked firewood by the kitchen doors, and children played in the narrow stone streets until the shadows grew too long. On the afternoon of October 28, 1994, those streets echoed with the laughter of one particular little girl, 7-year-old Isabel Montero. She was the youngest of 3 siblings, with a quick smile and a habit of skipping rather than walking, as if her small legs could barely contain her joy. That day, she was playing a simple game of chase with her cousin Sophia near the edge of the village. The hills beyond were dotted with chestnut trees, their prickly husks littering the ground. Somewhere between a burst of giggles and a quick turn to avoid being tagged, Isabel darted down a narrow footpath that wound between the trees. It was only a few seconds. Sophia called after her, expecting her to reappear just beyond the bend. But she didn't. Sophia stopped, scanning the path. The forest seemed suddenly still. She called again, louder this time. No answer. The chill that had been creeping into the late afternoon seemed sharper now. Her stomach tightened. She ran back toward the village, her breath coming fast, her words tumbling out as she told Isabel's mother what had happened. Maria, Isabel's mother, felt her knees weaken. She didn't wait to think. She grabbed a shawl, wrapped it around her shoulders, and hurried to the square where her husband Joe was finishing repairs on a neighbor's cart. Within minutes, the alarm had spread through Vale da Esperança. The men fetched lanterns and flashlights. Women wrapped scarves around their heads and called out Isabel's name into the dusk. By 5:30 p.m., as the light drained from the sky, the first organized search began. People fanned out into the fields and woods, their voices echoing in the cold air. By nightfall, the temperature had dropped to near freezing. The villagers knew the terrain well: rocky slopes, hidden gullies, streams that ran icy even in summer. For a child without proper winter clothing, the danger was immediate. The local Guarda Nacional Republicana was contacted, and soon uniformed officers joined the search, their high-powered torches sweeping through the undergrowth. But the forest is a vast, unpredictable place after dark. Every snapping twig felt like a possibility, every rustling leaf a false hope. Hours passed. Midnight came. The only sound was the crunch of boots on frosted earth and the distant bark of dogs. By 3 a.m., with no trace of Isabel, fear was settling like a weight over the village. Some of the older men muttered about the wolves that still roamed these hills in small numbers. Maria tried not to hear them. She stood by the church steps, clutching her rosary until her fingers ached. At dawn, more volunteers arrived from nearby towns. The regional civil protection unit joined in, using trained dogs to sweep the area. Helicopters were requested from the district capital to scan from the air. Still nothing. The sun offered little warmth, and clouds gathered by mid-morning, bringing a damp wind that made the cold bite deeper. Searchers moved through the hills, calling Isabel's name, checking every hollow, every abandoned shepherd's hut. By evening, her parents' faces had taken on that drawn, almost grey look of people holding themselves together by threads. That night, a frost settled over the valley. The thermometer in the church square read -2 degrees C before dawn. Experts quietly told Joe what no parent wants to hear, that after 48 hours in these conditions, the chances of survival for a child so young were slim. Maria refused to listen. She had spent the entire night in prayer, kneeling before the statue of Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception in the side chapel, whispering the same plea over and over. Mother, you stood at the foot of the cross. You know what it means to lose a child. Please stay with her. It was November 1st, All Saints' Day. The villagers gathered for early mass, the pews heavy with unspoken grief. but halfway through the service, two woodcutters from the far side of the ridge, Manuel Ferreira and his brother Tomás, entered the church, their eyes wide. They had been felling chestnut branches when they heard it, a faint, high-pitched sound carried on the wind. At first they thought it was a bird, then they heard it again, a cry. Dropping their tools, they followed the sound up a narrow deer trail, and there, sitting on a bed of dry leaves beneath a massive oak, was Isabel. She was smiling, not shaking, not crying, smiling. Her clothes were clean, her cheeks were warm to the touch, and when they asked if she was hurt, she shook her head. Tomás scooped her up in his coat, his heart pounding. "We've found her. She's alive," he shouted as they half ran, half slid back down the trail. By the time they reached the village square, people were pouring out of their houses. Maria ran forward, sobbing as she wrapped her arms around her daughter. Joe simply dropped to his knees, tears spilling freely. The GNR officers, expecting a child on the edge of hypothermia, quickly drove her to the regional hospital. Doctors ran checks, body temperature normal, hydration levels perfect, no frostbite, no bruising, no sign of malnutrition. It didn't make sense. 4 nights in near-freezing temperatures should have left severe damage, if not claimed her life entirely. Later that evening, when the nurses gently asked how she had managed to stay warm, Isabel's answer was calm, almost casual. "A senhora bonita ficu comigo." "The beautiful lady stayed with me." She described her as tall, dressed in white with a blue sash, and surrounded by a soft light like the sun behind a cloud. This lady had brought her food, warm bread and sweet water that tasted like flowers. She had covered her with a cloak that smelled like the church at Easter. When the nurses pressed her for more, Isabel added one final detail. "She told me not to be afraid, because she would bring me back to my mother." She repeated the same account to her parents, to the police, and to the village priest, always the same words, the same calm certainty. 2 days later, Maria took Isabel to Mass to give thanks. Inside the church, the little girl suddenly froze in front of the side altar. She pointed to the statue of Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception, the same statue before which Maria had prayed each night. Her voice was small but clear. "It's her. That's the lady who stayed with me." The villagers who heard her stood in silence. Some crossed themselves, others simply stared. In a place where devotion to Mary was woven into daily life, the recognition struck like a lightning bolt. As word spread, an elderly man named Padre Antonio, now retired, came forward with a story from decades earlier about another child, another disappearance, another miraculous return. The details were eerily similar. A girl lost for days in freezing weather, found unharmed, speaking of a woman in white who had kept her warm and fed. It was as if a forgotten thread of grace had been woven again into the fabric of their village life. When a child disappears and is found alive after days in the elements, authorities look for logical explanations. The district police sent 2 investigators from Braga to Vale dar Esperança. They interviewed Isabel privately, hoping to catch inconsistencies in her story. They asked practical questions. Had she seen any houses or people? Where did she sleep? What exactly had she eaten? Could she lead them back to the spot? Isabel answered each question with the simple honesty of a child. She described a soft place under a big tree, a constant light that never went away, and bread that didn't come from a bag. She spoke of the lady's voice as like music but quieter than a song, and insisted there were no other people, no fires, no roads. When they tried to have her draw the scene, she sketched only a tall figure in flowing robes, a glow around her head, and a cloak spread like wings. The investigators recorded everything, but their report concluded what the villagers already suspected. There was no evidence of where Isabel had been. No footprints, no disturbed earth. The cold ground should have kept her scent for the dogs, yet the tracking hounds had lost her trail entirely on the first night. The community's response in a village where nearly every family attended Sunday Mass. Isabel's return felt less like a recovery and more like a visitation. On the evening of her return, The church was packed for a rosary of thanksgiving. Candles flickered against the whitewashed walls, and the air was thick with the scent of incense and damp wool coats. People wept openly as Maria stood before the congregation, holding Isabel's hand. I asked Our Lady not to leave her, she told them, her voice breaking, and Our Lady stayed. The parish priest, Father Miguel, said little that night, but in his homily the following Sunday he spoke quietly of Psalm 91. He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness will be your shield and rampart. Many nodded through tears, some glancing toward the side altar where the statue of Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception stood, draped in a fresh blue mantle. An echo from the past. It was after this mass that Padre Antonio, the elderly retired priest, approached Father Miguel in the sacristy. This is not the first time, he said simply. He recounted an event from 1961 in the nearby Serra da Cabrera range. An 8-year-old shepherd girl named Lusa had vanished for 3 nights in late November after chasing a stray goat too far into the hills. When searchers found her, she was warm, well-fed, and unharmed. She spoke of a senhora vestida de luz, a lady dressed in light, who had stayed with her. Padre Antonio still remembered the drawing she made, a tall woman with a blue mantle and white gown, standing beneath a crescent moon. The similarities with Isabel's account were impossible to ignore. Both girls had been found on feast days, Luisa on the feast of the Presentation of Mary, Isabel on All Saints' Day. Both described the same radiant figure. Both had been in impossible conditions for survival. Media interest news travels fast in small villages, but by the end of that week, it had reached beyond the mountains. A regional journalist came to write a feature titled The Miracle in Vale da Esperança. His article described the search, the conditions, and Isabel's unwavering testimony. National television picked up the story, airing footage of the tiny white church, the villagers lighting candles, and Isabel shyly clutching her mother's skirt. The anchor ended the segment with a line that stirred both believers and skeptics. In an age of doubt, some still say heaven walks among us. Not everyone was convinced. In the nearby city of Braga, a columnist dismissed the account as the imagined memory of a frightened child, suggesting she had sheltered in an unused shepherd's hut and been fed by an unknown passerby. But even those willing to consider that theory couldn't explain her perfect health after 4 freezing nights, or the fact that no such hut was ever found. Father Miguel answered such doubts with characteristic gentleness, whether heaven sent her an angel, the Blessed Mother, or simply a stranger with a kind heart. The truth is that a little girl was saved, and we give thanks. By mid-November, strangers began appearing at Sunday Mass, some from neighboring villages, others from as far as Porto. They came to see the statue Isabel had recognized, to pray in the church where her mother had pleaded for her return. On one Saturday alone, Father Miguel counted 40 people kneeling before the side altar, whispering the Hail Mary. A few left notes of thanks or petitions on folded slips of paper beneath the statue. Maria and Joe, still overwhelmed by the attention, welcomed visitors politely but quietly. They kept Isabel away from interviews, allowing her to live as normally as possible. Still, she often came to the church on her own, leaving small wildflowers at the statue's feet. When asked by a neighbor's son months later whether she thought the lady was real, Isabel simply replied, "She held my hand. I know she's real." She never altered her story, not in childhood, not as a teenager, and not years later when she spoke of it to her own children. The details never grew more elaborate, never changed with retelling. Some villagers began keeping a mental ledger of the signs, the dates, both tied to Marian feast days. The weather, unusually still on the nights the girls were missing. The fact that each described not just light, but warmth in the midst of cold. An elderly woman named Dona Rosa put it simply over her coffee one morning. The senhora comes when mothers cry to her. She comes to bring them back. Father Miguel began corresponding with a historian of Marian apparitions in Coimbra. The historian pointed out that similar rescue visions have been recorded in rural Spain, Italy, and Poland, usually involving lost children, often in severe weather, and nearly always with descriptions of a radiant woman in white or blue who provides warmth and sustenance. In many of these cases, the children later recognized her in statues or paintings of the Virgin Mary. The parallels with Isabel's account and with Lewis's decades earlier were striking. Vale da Esperanza had always been a devout village, but the event seemed to breathe fresh life into old devotions. The nightly rosary, once sparsely attended, now filled the church. The Feast of the Immaculate Conception that December saw the largest procession in memory, and at the heart of it, Isabel walked hand in hand with her parents, clutching a single white rose. Months later, Maria spoke to Father Miguel privately after Mass. She confessed that before Isabel's disappearance, her faith had been like a candle burning low, dimmed by the weight of daily struggles. I prayed, yes, but I did not expect answers. That week the Senhora didn't just bring back my daughter. She brought back my faith. Years after, life in Vale da Esperanza eventually settled back into its familiar rhythm. Children still chased each other through the cobbled lanes, the farmers still rose before dawn, and the church bells still rang out across the valley. But there was a subtle difference now, a new undercurrent in conversations, a softness in the way people spoke about hope. For the villagers who had searched those cold hills in vain, Isabel's return was more than a happy ending. It was a living reminder that something or someone had intervened. Isabel herself grew into a gentle young woman, her eyes carrying the same brightness that people remembered from that day she was found under the oak. She rarely spoke publicly about the event, but when she did, it was always with the same steady voice. I wasn't alone. She stayed with me. Over the years, journalists returned now and then, especially around the anniversaries of her disappearance and rescue. They would knock on Maria's door, hoping for fresh details. But there were no new embellishments, no changes. Isabel's account never shifted. The lady in white with the blue sash, the warm bread, the sweet water, the cloak, the promise to bring her home. Skeptics who came expecting contradictions found none. Believers who came hoping for affirmation found it in her calm certainty. 10 years after her rescue, on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, Isabel walked once again in the procession, this time as a young adult. She carried a single lantern and walked beside the statue she had once pointed to as a child, the same statue before which her mother had begged for her safety. As the procession wound through the narrow streets, people sang the Ave Maria, their voices rising into the cold night. Elderly women clutched their rosaries tighter. Young parents held their children close. And in the flicker of the candlelight, it was easy to believe that the same gentle presence walked quietly among them. In the minds of many villagers, Isabel's rescue had become inseparable from the older story of Leusa in 1961. The two girls were different, the decades apart, but the essence was the same: a child in peril, a lady of light, a return against all odds. When these stories were told side by side, they no longer felt like isolated events. They felt like chapters in a single book, written by the same hand. Some will say that stories like these belong to the realm of imagination, that children under extreme stress can create visions to comfort themselves. Others will point to coincidences, to the possibility of unknown human intervention. And yet the questions remain. Why were there no footprints? Why was there no sign of exposure, no dehydration, no hypothermia? Why did two children, decades apart, describe almost the same figure? Why were they both found on Marian feast days? Even the most rational explanations stumble here. Maria has been asked many times what she believes happened. She always answers the same way. When I prayed that night, I prayed like I had never prayed before. I didn't ask for strength or for the searchers to find her quickly. I asked the Blessed Mother to stay with her, just stay with her until I could. That's what happened. She stayed. It's a mother's simple truth, unshaken by the passing years. The story of Isabel is not just about a lost child in a Portuguese mountain village. It's about a truth every heart understands, that there are winters not made of snow. Sometimes the cold comes in the form of grief that takes the breath from your lungs. Sometimes it's the loneliness that seeps in when you feel forgotten. Sometimes it's the fear that grips you when the path ahead disappears. We may never find ourselves alone on a mountainside at night, but we all know what it is to be lost, to feel the light fading, to wonder if anyone is coming for us. Isabel's story carries an unspoken invitation to believe that no one is ever truly alone, that there is a hand, sometimes unseen, sometimes radiant, that reaches into the darkness to keep us warm until the morning comes. For some, that hand is the faith they were raised with. For others, it's a grace they've never named before. For Maria and for Isabel, it was unmistakably the hand of the Mother of God, the same mother who stood by the cross and did not leave. The details may differ: white robe, blue sash, a voice like music, the scent of flowers, but the promise is the same. You are not abandoned. You are not beyond saving. There is a way home. If you find yourself in a season of cold, where the days seem short and the nights endless, if you are searching for a way forward but see nothing but shadows, remember Isabel under the oak. Remember Lusa in the hills. Remember that even in the places where help seems impossible, help can arrive, quietly, beautifully, unexpectedly. It may not come with light in the trees or the scent of Easter lilies. It may come in the form of a friend's voice, a stranger's kindness, or a sudden peace in the middle of chaos. The villagers of Vale da Esperanza have a simple prayer now, one that Father Miguel began teaching after Isabel's rescue. They pray it for travelers, for children, for anyone facing a hard path. Holy Mother, stay with them until the morning comes. It is a prayer born from a mother's cry in the night, a cry that was answered. Maybe you are watching this and thinking of someone you love who is far from home, not in distance, but in heart. Maybe you are the one feeling far away, wondering if anyone even notices you're gone. Hear this: if light can find a little girl in the freezing hills of Portugal, it can find you. If warmth can wrap around a child who should have been lost, it can wrap around you. If a voice can whisper "don't be afraid" in the darkness, it can whisper it to you now. In the corner of the church in Vale da Esperanza, there's still that statue of the Immaculate Conception. The blue mantle is a little faded now from the candles burning too close, and the gold trim has dulled with time. But the eyes seem to hold the same promise they held when a 7-year-old girl pointed to them and said, "It's her. That's the lady who stayed with me." And maybe, just maybe, that same promise waits for you, because the cold does not last forever, and the morning always comes.